I'm Oscar Reynolds, and for the past 18 years I've been the Senior IT Systems Architect at Cortex Solutions. At 45, my career has been defined by precision, reliability, and a quiet kind of dedication that most people overlook until something goes wrong and they realize who's been holding the fort. I've spent nearly 2 decades building and maintaining the digital backbone of a company that generates over $40 million annually. Every line of code, every server configuration, every security protocol, it all came through my hands and mind. The system isn't just a network of machines and software, it's a living, breathing organism, and I'm its caretaker. That morning, March 15th, 2024, felt no different at first. I arrived at Cortex' sleek downtown office just like any other day, coffee in hand, laptop bag slung over my shoulder, scanning my inbox for the usual flood of emails. My routine was impeccable. I knew every corner of that infrastructure like the back of my hand, understood the nuances of the system architecture, and had long earned the trust of clients and colleagues alike. My reputation was built on a foundation of thorough documentation and unshakable dependability. Every project I led was accompanied by meticulously detailed logs, diagrams, and reports that anticipated future challenges and possible solutions. No surprises, no guesswork. But then came the meeting. Ethan Wallace, the HR director, summoned me to his office with a terse email. I suspected nothing beyond the usual staffing discussions. I approached his office, the quiet hum of the building punctuated only by distant conversations and the clatter of keyboards. I opened the door to find Ethan sitting behind his polished desk, his expression unreadable but tense. "Oscar," he began, voice flat and controlled, "I need to inform you that the company is undergoing significant restructuring. Unfortunately, this means your position is terminated effective immediately." There was no preamble, no warning, just cold clinical words delivered with the detached efficiency of someone reading from a script. I felt a flicker of disbelief, but held it down. Over the years, I'd learned that emotion rarely helped in moments like this. "Understood," I replied evenly, my voice steady. I asked about severance and transition plans, but his responses were evasive, rehearsed. The room felt suddenly sterile, the walls closing in. Minutes later, reeling from the blow to my career, I walked into our home, carrying the weight of that termination like a stone in my chest. Maggie, my wife of 12 years, sat silently in the living room, eyes fixed on the floor. Her posture was rigid, almost alien to me. Before I could say a word, she looked up, and in a whisper so quiet I had to lean in to hear, she said, "I'm done. I'm leaving." The words hit me harder than any professional setback. In that instant, the 2 pillars of my life, work and home, crumbled simultaneously. Yet outwardly, I remained composed. I nodded, acknowledging her decision without protest. Inside, however, a storm of analysis began to rage. My mind, trained through years of systems architecture and problem-solving, switched into overdrive. This wasn't the moment for despair. It was the moment to observe, document, and plan. I remembered every contract clause I'd signed, every email confirming my role and responsibilities, every corporate policy that might shield me. I thought of the countless nights spent backing up critical system data, the countless hours spent creating detailed infrastructure maps. Every bit of information became a piece of armor, every documented fact a weapon. The silence in the house was thick, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. I knew the path ahead was uncertain, riddled with emotional and legal complexities, but I resolved to face it with the same meticulousness that had defined my career. Betrayal, I realized, was not just a personal fracture. It was a challenge that demanded a calm, strategic response. So there I was, a man whose world had just shifted beneath his feet. Yet beneath the calm exterior, the gears were turning. I wasn't going to let this double blow, professional and personal, define me or destroy me. Instead, I would dissect it, understand it, and find a way forward through the labyrinth of contract systems and human frailty. This was not the end, but the beginning of a battle fought with facts rather than fury. And though I didn't yet know the full scope of what lay ahead, I was ready to face it, step by calculated step. Over the course of those 18 years at Cortex, my role evolved far beyond just maintaining servers or tweaking code. I became the architect of something much larger, a complex enterprise-wide IT system that was essentially the lifeblood of the company's operations. When I first came on board, Cortex infrastructure was fragmented and prone to outages that cost the company valuable time and money. I took it upon myself to redesign and streamline the entire network from the ground up. My efforts reduced system downtime by nearly 35%, a figure that translated into saving the company approximately $1 million every single year. Those numbers weren't just statistics. They were proof that my work directly impacted the company's bottom line and its ability to serve clients smoothly. In 2015, nearly a decade into my tenure, I was promoted to Senior IT Systems Architect, a role that carried immense responsibility. Not only was I responsible for building and maintaining the physical servers and network topology, but I also held the keys, literally and figuratively, to the proprietary software and security protocols that kept Cortex competitive and secure. I was the only person who had full administrative access to the entire system. I held passwords to encrypted servers, controlled access rights, and authored the comprehensive documentation that mapped out every node, firewall rule, and backup routine. This documentation was no afterthought. It was a living, breathing manual that I updated religiously, anticipating potential points of failure and outlining clear remedies. My colleagues often joked that if I ever disappeared, the whole system would collapse because nobody else truly understood it from end to end. My $120,000 salary included not just cash compensation, but also an equity package built on a 3-year vesting schedule for stock options. This vesting clause was designed to keep key personnel like me committed and aligned with the company's long-term growth. I understood every nuance of this contract because it reflected years of loyalty, trust, and strategic planning. The stock options represented not just financial security, but a tangible stake in the company's future, a future I had helped build from the inside out. One of my most valuable habits was maintaining meticulous email correspondence and backup archives. Whether it was a technical discussion about server upgrades, a meeting summary with project deadlines, or a casual check-in about system health, I saved every relevant email. This habit wasn't born from paranoia, but from a professional ethos that foresaw the value of clear records, especially in an environment where decisions had far-reaching consequences. These archives became a safety net, a digital ledger that could verify what was said, agreed upon, or promised. It was this habit that would later prove to be one of my strongest assets. Clients trusted me implicitly because I was the unseen hand ensuring their data remained secure and their applications ran without interruption. Internally, my reliability and foresight earned me respect across departments. Project managers, developers, and even executives often came to me for advice on risk management and system scalability. I balanced technical expertise with a calm demeanor, never letting stress cloud my judgment or communication. That professional demeanor was a mask I perfected over years, one that allowed me to navigate challenges without causing alarm or panic. Ironically, this very indispensability, this depth of knowledge and control, made me a target. When the company began looking for ways to cut costs, my salary and entrenched role became liabilities in the eyes of executives seeking quick savings. They failed to grasp that replacing me with a less experienced contractor would not only risk operational failures, but could also expose the company to compliance violations and security breaches. But from their perspective, immediate payroll reduction was more tangible than potential future risks. In those years, I had learned the hard way that corporate loyalty could be transactional and fragile. Yet I had never imagined the betrayal would come so abruptly and from two fronts at once, my employer and my spouse. Despite that, my professional foundation was solid. The documentation, the contracts, the email trails, they were more than just words on paper. They were my shield and my sword in the battles to come. As I sat quietly processing the news that morning, all of this swirled in my mind. The years of dedication weren't just memories, they were ammunition. Each system diagram I'd drawn, every backup I'd secured, and every contractual detail I'd negotiated became part of a larger strategy. My career wasn't just a job I lost that day. It was a fortress built on precision, reliability, and foresight, and it was time to put that fortress to the test. The complexity of my role and the value I'd created were about to become the foundation for a fight that would demand every ounce of my resilience and knowledge. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. It was about proving that true expertise and meticulous documentation could withstand even the most calculated betrayals. Ethan Wallace wasn't just any HR director. He was the kind of executive who thrived under pressure, especially when that pressure came from the top floors, demanding swift and dramatic cost reductions. The company's board had set an aggressive target, a 20% cut in operating expenses within 6 months. It was a mandate with no wiggle room, and as HR head, Ethan was tasked with delivering these cuts primarily by downsizing higher-paid staff. My position, with its $120,000 annual salary and substantial benefits package, became an obvious target in his eyes. I knew the numbers well. Ethan had been negotiating with finance for months, looking to replace expensive, long-tenured employees like myself with contractors who required less overhead, people who could be hired on short-term contracts, paid significantly less, and without the burden of stock options or severance packages. The irony was bitter. After nearly 2 decades of dedicated service, my deep knowledge of the system and the undeniable value I brought to the company made me an inconvenient expense. Ethan's goal was clear: to erase that expense, regardless of the risks it posed to Cortex's mission-critical infrastructure. Behind the scenes, the plan was already in motion. Ethan had identified Paul Simmons, a relatively untested contractor with limited IT experience, to take over my responsibilities. Paul's hourly rate was nearly half of my salary, and he came without the contractual protections I had painstakingly negotiated over the years. Ethan believed that cutting costs and reducing long-term commitments would please the board and boost his standing. What he failed to appreciate, however, was the magnitude of the system knowledge embedded in my role, a knowledge that simply couldn't be transferred overnight. Simultaneously, on a far more personal front, Maggie, my wife of 12 years, was quietly orchestrating her own escape. I had no inkling of the brewing storm at home until that day. Unbeknownst to me, she had begun divorce proceedings weeks earlier. What stung most wasn't just the timing right after my termination, but the financial maneuvering she employed to conceal assets. I later discovered that she had transferred $118,000 from joint accounts into separate, undisclosed accounts, attempting to shield these funds from equitable division. It was a calculated move, designed to leave me financially vulnerable as well as professionally displaced. Maggie's actions were a profound betrayal, but they also revealed a fundamental miscalculation. She seemed unaware of the legal protections embedded in our marital agreements and the detailed financial records I maintained. More importantly, she underestimated the significance of my employment contract, particularly the clauses that governed stock vesting and severance entitlements. These weren't mere formalities. They were concrete shields I could wield in the fight for what was rightfully mine. I had reviewed our marital finances meticulously over the years. As a financial co-manager, I had access to all account statements, transaction histories, and tax filings. Her attempts at concealment were amateurish, leaving clear digital footprints. These discrepancies would prove crucial in subsequent legal proceedings. Meanwhile, Ethan's strategy hinged on 3 critical oversights. First, he assumed that severance and vesting clauses in my contract could be sidestepped through abrupt termination. Second, he ignored the non-compete and non-disclosure clauses that restricted how Paul could operate, especially without proper credentials and system knowledge. Finally, he underestimated how deeply integrated I was within Cortex systems. If Paul could not effectively manage the infrastructure, the entire company would bear the cost. At this juncture, I reached out to David Matthews, a seasoned employment lawyer who had advised me in prior contract negotiations. David immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. He understood that Ethan and Maggie's parallel betrayals weren't isolated. They were part of a coordinated attempt to undermine my professional and personal stability. He assured me that the legal frameworks we had in place, combined with my exhaustive documentation and email trails, gave us substantial leverage. David emphasized the importance of acting methodically, gathering all relevant evidence, preserving system logs, and carefully documenting every communication. The stakes were high, but the path forward was clear. The battle would be fought not with emotion, but with facts, contracts, and unassailable proof. The foundation was laid for a confrontation that would test not only my resilience, but also the strength of the systems I had built and the protections I had secured. As I absorbed this, a cold clarity settled over me. Betrayal on two fronts, Ethan's calculated corporate maneuver and Maggie's secretive financial subterfuge, was designed to leave me exposed. Yet their critical mistakes lay in underestimating the depth of my preparation, the solidity of my agreements, and my resolve to defend what was mine. This was no longer a fight about lost job titles or broken relationships. It was a strategic battle, demanding precision, patience, and unwavering adherence to the facts. Sitting at my kitchen table that evening, the termination letter spread out before me under the muted glow of the desk lamp, I began a painstaking review of every clause, phrase, and omission. The paper was cold to the touch, but what chilled me more was the glaring absence of any mention of severance pay. After 18 years of dedication, my contract, painstakingly negotiated and carefully preserved, clearly outlined severance benefits in the event of sudden termination. Yet here was a formal document that severed my employment without a hint of compensation or transitional support. It felt less like a professional severance and more like a calculated cut, a deliberate erasure of my contributions and security. My eyes then caught a passage buried deep in the fine print, a confidentiality clause designed to muzzle me. It forbade me from discussing details of my termination or the company's internal affairs. The wording was precise and suffocating. Any breach could lead to legal action. In that moment, I recognized the insidious purpose behind this clause. It wasn't about protecting the company's interests so much as silencing dissent, preventing me from exposing the shady undercurrents that led to my firing. This was a warning disguised as a contract term, aiming to intimidate me into silence. But I knew better. Silence would not serve me. Over the years, I had cultivated a digital fortress, a mountain of emails, system logs, and documented communications that traced every discussion related to my role and the infrastructure I managed. I reached for my laptop and began combing through my inbox to cross-reference dates and verify the timeline. The emails unveiled a pattern. Ethan Wallace had been orchestrating my replacement for weeks before my termination. Meeting invites I'd never received, conversations about transition strategies and cost-cutting circulated without my knowledge. It was a covert campaign, veiled in corporate jargon, but unmistakably aimed at sidelining me. Digging deeper, I uncovered the name of the contractor Ethan had already onboarded, Paul Simmons. Paul was a relatively new hire with a patchy background in IT and no prior access to Cortex complex systems. According to the emails and internal memos, Paul had been granted limited credentials, far short of the full administrative rights necessary to maintain the enterprise-wide infrastructure I had architected. This was a glaring oversight, one that jeopardized system stability. Yet from Ethan's perspective, Paul represented a cost-effective solution, despite the risk. I felt a flicker of vindication. Paul's limited clearance meant he couldn't possibly manage the systems independently. I knew that without my knowledge and access, the company's IT backbone was vulnerable. As I stored screenshots and exported logs, I anticipated the fallout that would come when critical system failures inevitably surfaced. Turning to my personal sphere, I accessed the online banking portal, something I had grown accustomed to inspecting meticulously. There, the evidence of Maggie's betrayal emerged with stark clarity. Transfers totaling $118,000 had been moved from joint accounts into shadowy, undisclosed accounts. The timing was no coincidence. These transactions had begun just weeks before my termination and intensified in the days that followed. It was a deliberate effort to cloak assets from equitable distribution, a move that struck at my financial security as ruthlessly as Ethan's professional assault. Yet, Maggie's financial maneuvering was clumsy compared to the precision I wielded. I had maintained detailed records of every transaction, every deposit and withdrawal, tax documents and account statements lined up like pieces in a puzzle, revealing the trail she tried to erase. Moreover, I recalled the marital agreements we had signed years ago, legal protections that defined how assets should be shared. Her attempts to conceal funds were breaches, violations that would come under scrutiny with the help of legal counsel. I leaned back, running my hands through my hair, momentarily overwhelmed by the dual scale of deception. But beneath the surface, a methodical calm took root. I opened my employment contract once more, reading through clauses with renewed focus. There were clear terms guaranteeing severance pay tied to my 3-year vesting schedule. The non-compete and confidentiality agreements, while restrictive, also created boundaries that Ethan and his contractors had to respect. Most notably, my role's unique system dependencies meant no one else could simply step in without exposure to risk and compliance issues. The emails between Ethan and the finance department illuminated his critical misjudgment. He had underestimated the complexity of my responsibilities and the contractual safeguards protecting my position. Neither he nor Maggie appeared to grasp the full implications of their actions. As I gathered printed copies of these documents, I realized the scope of the battle ahead. This was no ordinary dispute. It was a layered conflict involving corporate policy violations, financial deception, and systemic vulnerabilities that threatened the company's operational integrity. I paused, staring at the array of evidence before me. Termination paperwork with glaring omissions, a confidentiality clause designed to suppress my voice, emails exposing covert plans, financial trails revealing concealed assets, and the undeniable truth that the contractor brought in as my replacement lacked the clearance or expertise to keep the company's systems secure. The stakes were higher than I had anticipated. But armed with facts, contracts, and an unshakable resolve, I was ready to begin the fight. The next steps would require legal expertise and strategic precision. But one thing was clear. The foundations of Ethan and Maggie's schemes were riddled with cracks, and I intended to expose every one of them. The moment I realized the depth of the betrayals and the mounting risks, I knew I couldn't face this alone. I needed a steady hand, someone who understood the complexities of employment law and the intricacies of corporate contracts. So, I reached out to David Matthews, an employment lawyer I'd worked with before during contract renewals and minor disputes. David's reputation for meticulousness and strategic thinking made him the perfect ally for what was shaping up to be a battle on multiple fronts. Within hours, I had scheduled a consultation. The urgency of the situation propelled me into action. I began assembling every piece of evidence I could find: emails, contracts, financial records, and system logs, everything that could paint a clear, undeniable picture of what had transpired. I worked late into the night at my kitchen table, the glow from my laptop casting long shadows across piles of printed documents. Each email was carefully cross-referenced with meeting notes and company memos. The financial statements revealed Maggie's suspicious transfers, and the employment contract highlighted blatant omissions and breaches by Cortec. To ensure nothing was lost, I created a chronological dossier, a detailed timeline that traced the progression from the initial discussions about my termination to the covert transfer of funds and the onboarding of a contractor who lacked necessary system clearances. This timeline wasn't just a collection of dates and facts. It was a narrative of calculated decisions made behind my back, each one chipping away at my professional life and personal security. Recognizing the fragility of digital data, I encrypted backups of all critical system documents, infrastructure diagrams, and correspondence. I knew these files were more than just technical manuals. They were the blueprint of the company's very heartbeat, something only I truly understood. If these were lost or tampered with, Cortec would face chaos, and my leverage would diminish. So I stored encrypted copies on multiple secure drives and cloud accounts, each protected by layered security protocols I had built over the years. Beyond the documents and digital files, I reached out to trusted colleagues, those who had witnessed Ethan's maneuvers or had been excluded from transition meetings. Their statements would serve as corroborating witnesses to the unfolding conspiracy. I requested written recollections and logged informal conversations, careful to preserve their words without exposing them to corporate repercussions. Their testimonies helped fill gaps in the story, revealing patterns of exclusion and manipulation that could not be denied. As I reviewed every piece of evidence, I identified key vulnerabilities in Ethan's plan. The non-compete and severance clauses in my contract were not simply legal jargon. They were shields I could wield. These clauses explicitly tied severance pay to my 3-year vesting schedule and prohibited the company from circumventing contractual obligations through sudden termination without cause. Moreover, the non-disclosure and non-compete provisions constrained Paul Simmons' ability to assume my responsibilities independently, particularly since he lacked the necessary credentials and system knowledge. This created a critical operational risk for CoreTech, one that could not be ignored. Similarly, Maggie's attempts to conceal assets were legally precarious. Her clandestine transfers violated the principles of marital property law and the agreements we had jointly signed. Yet, she seemed unaware of the comprehensive financial records I maintained. These records were far from ordinary. They were meticulously detailed, cross-verified with bank statements, tax filings, and digital transaction histories. This level of documentation was a potent weapon to challenge any claim she might make to obscure financial equities. With David's guidance, I began formulating a strategic approach. Leverage the severance clause to demand rightful compensation, expose the asset concealment through financial and legal channels, and pressure CoreTech by highlighting the operational vulnerabilities that threatened the company's compliance and stability. We discussed the importance of timing, precision in filing complaints, and maintaining a professional demeanor in all communications. David stressed that our case needed to rest on irrefutable facts and coherent documentation. Emotional reactions would only cloud the issue. Instead, we would build an unassailable fortress of evidence. Our first steps would include drafting formal legal notices, preserving all communications, and initiating discreet inquiries with regulatory bodies overseeing labor and IT compliance. As I absorbed David's counsel, a quiet resolve settled over me. The betrayal I faced was layered and personal, but it was not insurmountable. With the documents secured, witnesses engaged, and a legal expert by my side, I was no longer facing this storm blindly. Each carefully preserved email, every encrypted backup, and every sworn testimony was a thread woven into a tapestry of truth that would unravel the deception. Yet, despite this growing arsenal, I understood the path ahead would demand patience and strategic restraint. This was not a battle to be rushed or fought impulsively. The stakes, career, finances, reputation, were too high. Instead, I would proceed methodically, using the very systems and contracts that had sustained me for 18 years as my armor and sword. Sitting back in my chair, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, knowing the first crucial phase of planning was complete. The foundation was laid, the pieces assembled. Now it was time to move forward with calculated precision, step by deliberate step. David Matthews was the steady hand I desperately needed. From the moment I laid out the layers of betrayal, Ethan's sudden termination without severance, the covert replacement with an unqualified contractor, and Maggie's secretive asset transfers, David's sharp mind began dissecting the case with clinical precision. Our initial meeting was a deep dive into the mountain of documents I'd assembled. He scrutinized the termination letter first, his brow furrowing at the glaring absence of anything related to severance pay. "Oscar," he said, "this isn't just a cold layoff, it's a violation of your contract." He flipped through the pages of the employment agreement we had reviewed together years ago, pointing to the severance clause, a well-defined promise that guaranteed compensation tied to the length of service and the vesting schedule of stock options. "CoreTech can't just cut this off without cause or negotiation," he explained. "That's your first strong legal lever." David then turned his attention to the fiduciary duties owed by CoreTech and its executives, particularly Ethan Wallace. "Ethan has a duty not just to cut costs, but to act in good faith," David remarked. "Replacing you with someone lacking proper credentials and system knowledge isn't just reckless, it's arguably negligent and could expose the company to regulatory liabilities." He tapped on the technical documentation I'd brought, his eyes narrowing at the system diagrams and logs, proving the contractor's inability to manage critical infrastructure independently. "This shows the company knowingly endangered its operational integrity. That strengthens your position significantly." The lawyer's focus shifted seamlessly from the corporate to the personal. He reviewed the financial evidence of Maggie's asset concealment. "Moving $118,000 into undisclosed accounts without your knowledge is a clear violation of marital property laws," David said firmly. "Coupled with the fact that you have detailed records of all joint accounts and transactions, this is not going to fly in family court." He emphasized the importance of these documents in court filings, proof that Maggie attempted to deliberately deprive you of equitable interests. We can petition for the court to freeze those assets pending hearing, and we will. We mapped out the legal pathways, starting with a formal complaint against Cortec for breach of contract. David advised that the denial of severance pay, coupled with the sudden termination and replacement with an unqualified contractor, constituted a breach not only of the employment contract, but also of implied covenants of good faith and fair dealing. This is the sort of case that can trigger Department of Labor investigations and potentially IT regulatory scrutiny, he said. The stipulations in the contract, especially the non-compete and non-disclosure clauses, were double-edged swords. They protected the company, but also restricted the replacement contractor's actions, creating a compliance risk that Ethan seemed oblivious to. David's thoroughness extended to the email correspondence I'd preserved. Together, we highlighted exchanges where Ethan coordinated behind the scenes to exclude me from transition meetings, circumventing the contractual right to a proper handover. This is evidence of bad faith, David noted. We'll include this in our complaints to show intent to undermine your position. On the financial front, David introduced me to expert forensic accountants who could analyze the bank records and trace Maggie's transactions with precision. Their reports will be instrumental in court, David explained. They can corroborate your detailed records and expose any attempts to hide assets. Our strategy formed around 3 pillars. First, enforce the severance and stock vesting provisions through legal claims. Second, expose and reverse Maggie's asset concealment via family court. Third, leverage the operational risk posed by the contractor's limited access to pressure Cortec and trigger regulatory inquiries. David emphasized the importance of meticulous documentation at every stage, reinforcing that facts, not emotions, will win this battle. We also discussed the tactical necessity of maintaining professionalism in all subsequent communications. David warned against any direct confrontation or emotional responses that could be used against me. Instead, every interaction would be channeled through legal representatives, ensuring a controlled narrative. As we wrapped up the meeting, David's confidence steadied me. "Oscar, the evidence you have is compelling. Your documentation, your contracts, the email trails, they form a fortress around your claims. We'll build the case step by step, ensuring every legal angle is covered." The calm authority in his voice was a lifeline. Leaving that meeting, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The betrayals that had first felt like devastating blows were now challenges with defined legal remedies. Each piece of evidence, from system logs to financial statements, was a weapon, and David's expertise was the guidance required to wield them effectively. The battle ahead would be complex and arduous, but for the first time, I saw a clear path to reclaiming what was mine, not through bitterness or retaliation, but through unassailable legal and professional strategy. Serving legal notices felt like the first tangible step in transforming my swirling frustration and betrayal into concrete action. With David's guidance, I prepared formal filings addressed to Cortec Solutions and Maggie, each meticulously detailing the breaches and injustices I had uncovered. The notice to Cortec asserted my claim for unpaid severance, referencing the explicit clauses in my contract, guaranteeing compensation tied to my 18 years of service and the 3-year vesting schedule for stock options. I carefully outlined how the abrupt termination without any severance offer violated these terms, backing every claim with exact excerpts from my contract and the termination letter, which conspicuously lacked any severance mention. The notice didn't stop there. It also highlighted Cortec's dangerous gamble in replacing me with Paul Simmons, a contractor who lacked necessary system access and credentials. I demanded immediate remediation of this operational risk, emphasizing the company's fiduciary responsibility to maintain system stability and compliance. The letter called for a prompt meeting to discuss corrective measures, or else I would escalate the matter with labor regulators and IT compliance authorities. Every sentence was calibrated to demonstrate my awareness of the company's obligations and to signal that I was fully prepared to use the legal tools at my disposal. Simultaneously, the notice served to Maggie was equally precise and unyielding. It formally accused her of concealing $118,000 in joint assets through unauthorized transfers into undisclosed accounts, actions that blatantly violated marital property laws and our prior financial agreements. The document demanded equitable asset distribution and notified her that I had engaged legal counsel to petition family court for asset freezing orders to prevent any further concealment or dissipation of funds. This was not a personal confrontation, but a legal assertion of my rights, backed by her own digital transaction records, which left little room for plausible denial. After dispatching these notices, I coordinated with David to file formal complaints with the Department of Labor and the state's IT Regulatory Board. The labor complaint focused on Cortex's failure to honor severance agreements and the breach of good faith in terminating a long-standing employee without cause or adequate compensation. The IT regulatory complaint underscored the compliance risks introduced by onboarding a contractor without proper system clearance, potentially exposing Cortex to security breaches and operational failures. These complaints weren't mere formalities. They were strategic pressure points designed to compel accountability and action. At the same time, I took care to manage communications professionally and discreetly. David advised me to avoid direct confrontations or emotional exchanges, so I channeled all inquiries and responses through my legal team. I notified key clients and project stakeholders in measured, confidential briefings that acknowledged the ongoing personnel changes and assured them of continued service quality, without divulging sensitive legal disputes. This transparency was crucial to maintaining trust without compromising the legal process or causing alarm. Amidst this flurry of legal maneuvers, I also secured a consulting contract with a reputable competing tech firm. This move was both practical and symbolic. Practical in ensuring financial stability during the drawn-out dispute, and symbolic in reaffirming my professional value. Despite the company's attempts to sideline me, the consulting role leveraged my extensive knowledge and experience, but with better compensation and flexibility, empowering me to stand on my own terms rather than depend on a company that had betrayed me. Throughout this period, I maintained a composed, professional demeanor in every interaction. Inside, I was acutely aware of the mounting tension. The stakes were high, the adversaries determined. But my approach was deliberate, every step rooted in documented facts, every word measured to avoid missteps that could undermine my position. I reminded myself constantly that this was a marathon, not a sprint, and that patience, persistence, and strategic clarity were my greatest assets. As the legal notices were delivered and complaints filed, I sensed the first tremors of change beginning to ripple beneath the surface at Cortex and within my personal sphere. The carefully constructed facades of control and secrecy that Ethan and Maggie had relied upon were now under scrutiny. Yet despite the brewing storm, the path forward remained uncertain. I had set in motion forces that would test not only my resilience, but also the vulnerabilities of those who had sought to discard me. And so, with the initial legal salvo launched and my professional footing secured through consulting, I braced myself for the unfolding consequences, knowing that the battle had truly begun and the next moves would be critical. Within just a few weeks, the cracks in Cortex IT infrastructure began to widen, visible even to those outside the technical teams. The recurring system failures weren't subtle glitches. They were glaring disruptions that shook the company's operational core. Paul Simmons, my replacement, was simply in over his head. Without the critical passwords and in-depth system knowledge that only I held, he struggled daily to keep the enterprise's complex network running. What I'd anticipated quickly became reality. The company's digital backbone, meticulously designed for seamless performance, was faltering. I monitored these developments with a mix of grim satisfaction and concern. From afar, I kept tabs on system alerts and client feedback, details I gathered through discreet channels and trusted colleagues who remained loyal. Server outages increased in frequency. Scheduled backups failed. The vital security protocols I had painstakingly layered over the years were left vulnerable due to improper implementation by someone unfamiliar with Cortex proprietary systems. It wasn't just technical failure, it was a ticking time bomb threatening to undermine the company's credibility. Clients naturally noticed. Their trust depended on consistent uptime and robust data protection, two pillars Cortex was now failing to uphold. I began receiving indirect reports from contacts within the client services teams about escalating client alarm and dissatisfaction. The whispers of concern soon grew into formal complaints. Major clients demanded explanations, pushing Cortex management into a defensive posture. Auditors were called in to investigate the causes behind the systemic failures, signaling the first official recognition of a crisis. At the same time, the Department of Labor launched an investigation into Cortex employment practices, spurred by the formal complaints David and I had filed. They scrutinized the abrupt termination without severance, the company's compliance with labor laws, and the questionable onboarding of Paul as a contractor without proper credentials. This regulatory spotlight intensified pressure on Cortex HR and executive teams, forcing them to confront the consequences of their cost-cutting gambit. Ethan Wallace's demeanor shifted noticeably as the days passed. The confident executive who had delivered my termination with such icy detachment began making uncharacteristic moves. I started receiving phone calls and emails from him, each more desperate than the last. He offered consulting fees, a thinly veiled attempt to buy silence and cooperation. His tone was calculated but edged with panic as he realized the gravity of the operational risks he had unleashed. I responded with professionalism, directing all communications to my lawyers and carefully documenting every exchange. I knew that every word, every interaction, could become evidence in the legal battles ahead. Meanwhile, Maggie's evasive behavior became increasingly apparent in court filings. The attempts to conceal $118,000 in joint assets, once a mere suspicion, were now thoroughly documented by financial experts working alongside David. The court took notice, imposing temporary freezes on those accounts and scrutinizing her transactions with increasing skepticism. Her failure to disclose these funds transparently added significant legal weight against her in the ongoing divorce proceedings. I felt a complex swirl of emotions during this period. Watching the intricate web Ethan and Maggie had spun begin to unravel was satisfying, yet the stakes were immense. Cortex faltering systems impacted real people, clients, employees, stakeholders, all caught in the fallout of poor decisions and betrayals. I reminded myself to stay focused, maintaining the professional detachment that had guided me from the start. The growing operational chaos at Cortex, combined with the mounting legal pressures, created a volatile atmosphere. Internal meetings, once routine, now hummed with tension. Whispers of audits and regulatory visits circulated through the halls. Key clients, wary of continued instability, began exploring alternative service providers, an ominous sign of potential revenue loss for the company. Through it all, I maintained a deliberate calm. I avoided direct confrontation or emotionally charged exchanges, understanding that patience was a weapon as powerful as any legal filing or technical safeguard. Each documented phone call, every email from Ethan, every court motion against Maggie, added bricks to the fortress of my case. The initial tremors of the consequences I had set in motion were unmistakable. Cortex was facing an operational and reputational crisis, while my personal legal battles tightened their grip. Yet despite this growing storm, I held firm, knowing the road ahead would demand continued vigilance and strategic precision. The game was shifting, but the outcome was far from certain. The moment David filed the lawsuit, a new chapter of this long, grueling ordeal was officially underway. The complaint spelled out a demand for $450,000 in severance and damages, an amount carefully calculated to encompass not only the financial losses from Cortex's breach of contract, but also the intangible costs of reputational harm and emotional distress inflicted by their reckless decisions. It wasn't just about money. It was about holding them accountable for the betrayal that had upended my life. The lawsuit meticulously laid bare the company's disregard for the explicit severance provisions that had been part of my contract for nearly 2 decades. It highlighted the sudden termination without cause, the secret onboarding of an underqualified contractor, incapable of managing critical infrastructure, and the broader breach of fiduciary duty that put the company's operational stability at risk. Almost simultaneously, David moved swiftly in family court. He petitioned to freeze the assets Maggie had tried so desperately to conceal, those hidden transfers totaling $118,000 that lay buried in shadowy accounts beyond my reach. The court's response came quickly. They recognized the gravity of the situation and granted a freeze order on those accounts. preventing any further dissipation of funds while legal proceedings were underway. This was a critical victory, a legal barricade protecting what was rightfully mine from disappearing into thin air. The freezing of assets sent a clear message. Attempts to manipulate and hide marital property would not go unanswered. It was a firm rebuke to Maggie's evasive tactics, underscoring that the law would not tolerate deceit, especially when backed by such comprehensive evidence. Meanwhile, the regulatory wheels began to turn with increasing momentum. The Department of Labor escalated their investigation into Cortex labor practices, prompted by our formal complaint. Their inquiry dug deep into the circumstances surrounding my abrupt termination, examining whether the company had violated employment laws by denying severance and failing to provide just cause. Alongside this, the state's IT Compliance Board launched a parallel review, alarmed by the potential security risks posed by the uninformed contractor Paul Simmons. The absence of proper credentials and system clearance was more than an operational issue. It raised questions about data protection, regulatory compliance, and corporate governance. This twin regulatory scrutiny began to press Cortex leadership from multiple angles, rattling their confidence and forcing them into a defensive posture. At the same time, I maintained careful communication with key clients, discreet factual updates that acknowledged the ongoing personnel transition, but reassured them of continued service quality. I was acutely aware of the delicate balance between transparency and discretion. I didn't want to panic clients or undermine Cortex reputation unnecessarily, but I also needed to prepare them for potential disruptions caused by the contractor's limited access. These conversations were always measured, professional, and guided by my commitment to safeguarding both my clients and my own credibility. It was crucial to demonstrate that despite the upheaval, I remained a reliable expert in the field, someone who could be trusted to manage complexity even under pressure. Meanwhile, Maggie's courtroom evasions grew more transparent with each filing. The financial experts David engaged pored over bank statements and transaction histories, producing detailed reports that confirmed the concealment of assets. The mounting evidence severely weakened her position, turning what might have been a private dispute into a legal spectacle with clear implications. As the freeze orders remained in effect, the court made it evident that any attempts to sidestep financial disclosure would be met with serious consequences. Her refusal to cooperate fully only compounded her legal risks, amplifying the leverage I now held. Throughout this period, Ethan's desperation became palpable. The calls started out measured but quickly shifted in tone, urgent, pleading, even veiled threats cloaked in corporate politeness. He offered consulting fees in an attempt to buy silence, proposing quiet resolutions that might contain the damage. His miscalculation was thinking I could be swayed by money, when what I sought was justice and accountability. Every interaction was professionally documented and forwarded to my legal team. I was resolute, responding only through my lawyers and refusing to engage directly. This restraint was deliberate. I understood that maintaining control over the narrative was essential to the case's integrity. Backed by mounting regulatory pressure and the growing weight of legal actions, the foundations of Ethan and Maggie's carefully constructed plans began to crumble. Their attempts to isolate and disempower me had backfired spectacularly. The combined force of the lawsuit, the asset freezes and regulatory investigations created a multi-front assault they were ill-prepared to counter. What had seemed like calculated moves to cut costs and escape financial obligation now exposed them to far-reaching consequences. The turmoil rippled through Cortex corridors, unsettling executives and alarming clients alike. I remained strategically patient, understanding that these early victories were only the beginning. The legal and regulatory landscape was complex and slow-moving, but the tide was unmistakably turning in my favor. Each document filed, each investigation launched, tightened the noose around those who had underestimated me. The battle was far from over, but the momentum was shifting, and I was prepared to see it through with unyielding resolve and unwavering professionalism. The fallout from the legal actions and regulatory investigations was swift and unforgiving, hitting both Ethan and Maggie in ways neither had fully anticipated. For Ethan, the professional consequences came crashing down like a landslide. The evidence we compiled, technical documentation proving Paul Simmons' inability to manage Cortex systems, emails exposing Ethan's covert efforts to replace me without proper procedures, and the mounting audits triggered by client complaints became impossible to ignore. The company's board, facing regulatory scrutiny and the tangible risk of losing key clients, had little choice but to act decisively. Within a matter of weeks, Ethan Wallace was terminated for gross negligence. The official statement cited his failure to uphold fiduciary responsibilities and the severe operational risks his decisions had introduced. It was a stunning reversal from the man who had coldly delivered my termination so many weeks before. Ethan's reputation in the industry was irreparably damaged. Suspension of his professional licenses followed, and news of the scandal spread quietly but steadily through IT circles. His blacklisting was complete, a cautionary tale whispered among HR executives and IT leaders alike, proof that cutting corners and betraying loyal employees could carry severe professional costs. CoreTech itself didn't escape unscathed. The Department of Labor's investigation culminated in fines totaling $1.2 million, a punitive measure reflecting the company's blatant violations of employment law. But the financial penalty was just one facet of the fallout. Two of CoreTech's major clients, alarmed by the ongoing system failures and regulatory clouds, severed their contracts. The loss of these clients struck a deep blow to the company's revenue projections and market standing, forcing a scramble among executives to stabilize operations and repair reputational damage. Meanwhile, Maggie's attempts to conceal $118,000 in joint assets backfired spectacularly. The forensic accountants David had engaged traced each suspicious transfer with painstaking precision. The court, presented with undeniable proof of asset concealment, issued permanent orders forbidding her from accessing or moving the disputed funds. The freeze orders transitioned into final judgments, awarding me the full $118,000 plus legal fees to cover the costs of the investigation. Maggie's evasions not only failed to protect her interests, but also severely harmed her credibility in the family court and beyond. The divorce proceedings, which had initially seemed like a straightforward separation, transformed into a bitter legal battle. The court scrutinized every financial document and transaction, and Maggie's attempts to obfuscate the truth were repeatedly rebuffed. Judges often referenced the comprehensive documentation I had provided: bank statements, tax documents, transaction logs, painting a clear picture of deliberate concealment. The final rulings favored me substantially, ensuring a fair and equitable division of assets and reinforcing the legal principle that deceit would not be rewarded. The combined legal and financial judgments devastated both Ethan's and Maggie's professional and personal standings. Ethan's career was effectively over. The fine print of his HR contract and the public nature of the investigation meant future employment opportunities in reputable firms vanished overnight. Maggie, too, faced social and legal repercussions. Her reputation among friends, colleagues, and the community suffered, and the legal costs she incurred compounded her challenges. The very maneuvers she thought would secure her independence instead shackled her in a web of accountability. Media outlets within the tech and business sectors picked up on the story, further amplifying the fallout. Industry publications detailed CoreTech's regulatory failures and internal turmoil, highlighting the risks companies face when cutting experienced staff without due diligence. The scandal became a cautionary tale, sparking conversations about corporate governance, ethical responsibility, and the importance of protecting loyal employees through transparent, lawful processes. Moreover, the ripple effects extended beyond Ethan and Maggie. Several former CoreTech employees witnessing the outcomes of my case came forward with their own accounts of questionable terminations and workplace grievances. This surge of whistleblowers intensified the company's difficulties, prompting additional investigations and deepening the crisis. The company's board faced mounting pressure to restructure and implement sweeping reforms to restore trust and compliance. Through it all, I maintained a steady course. The legal victories, while significant, were only part of the journey. I continued to document every development meticulously, ensuring that every judgment, court order, and regulatory action was recorded and preserved. The professionalism I upheld throughout this ordeal reinforced my credibility and positioned me as a respected figure in both legal and industry circles. Despite the upheaval, I refused to let bitterness or revenge cloud my judgment. Instead, I focused on the facts, the evidence, and the strategic path forward. Financially, the judgment secured a foundation of stability. The awarded sums, including the $118,000 asset recovery and legal fees, alleviated immediate concerns and validated the meticulous records I had maintained. These resources allowed me to rebuild without the shadow of Maggie's attempts to deny me what was rightfully mine. The personal transformation was profound. The betrayals that had once felt like insurmountable blows became catalysts for renewal and growth. I emerged not only vindicated, but strengthened by the experience, my professional reputation intact, my financial security restored, and my resolve hardened. The meticulous strategy we followed proved that measured, fact-based responses could overcome even the most calculated betrayals. Yet, even as these judgments landed and the dust began to settle, the journey was far from over. The consequences rippled outward, affecting Cortec, its clients, and the wider industry. The story continued to unfold with new challenges and opportunities on the horizon. I remained vigilant, ready to navigate whatever came next, with the same calm, strategic mindset that had carried me through the darkest days. The courtroom was packed with quiet intensity on the day the final rulings were read. I sat in the gallery, my hands folded calmly in my lap, as the judge methodically announced the decisions that would reshape the lives of everyone involved. The weight of nearly a year's worth of painstaking preparation and legal battles culminated in that moment. Yet inside I felt a curious mix of relief and resolve, not triumph. The judge's voice cut through the stillness, delivering the verdict that awarded me $568,000. This figure wasn't arbitrary. It encompassed compensation for unpaid severance, contractual damages, and the full recovery of assets that Maggie had tried to hide. The court's recognition of these legitimate claims validated every email I'd archived, every line of my contract I'd studied, and every financial record that had been scrutinized under the unforgiving lens of justice. It was a victory grounded not in emotion, but in facts, law, and undeniable evidence. From the courtroom, I could see the subdued faces of representatives from Cortec's board of directors. Their expressions betrayed a mixture of frustration and apprehension. The ruling sent a clear message. The company's leadership had failed in their fiduciary responsibilities, and now regulatory agencies were demanding accountability. The Department of Labor's investigation, combined with the IT Compliance Board's findings, had culminated in heavy penalties against Cortec. The company was fined $1.2 million, a punitive measure reflecting not only the unlawful termination, but also the operational risks introduced by their reckless staffing decisions. But the consequences went far beyond financial penalties. The board was compelled to initiate a sweeping restructuring process. The court's decision underscored systemic governance failures, forcing Cortec to re-examine its executive oversight and internal controls. Rumors circulated that several senior executives were on the brink of dismissal as the company struggled to restore its tarnished reputation. The ripple effects of this scandal would linger for months, if not years. Ethan Wallace's downfall was swift and unforgiving. The evidence we uncovered painted a damning portrait, a man who had deliberately circumvented policy, ignored critical compliance protocols, and jeopardized the company's operational integrity, all in the name of cost-cutting. His termination was accompanied by the suspension of his professional licenses and a de facto blacklisting within the IT and HR communities. Where once he wielded influence, now his name was whispered as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of what happens when ambition trumps ethics. On the personal front, the court's verdict was equally decisive. Maggie's attempts to conceal nearly $120,000 in joint assets had backfired spectacularly. The forensic accountant's meticulous trace of her financial maneuvers left no room for doubt. The judge ruled that all concealed assets be transferred to me, alongside an award covering legal fees and costs incurred during the investigation. The court's firm stance on asset concealment sent a clear signal. The law would not tolerate deception, especially when backed by overwhelming documentation. The divorce proceedings, which had dragged on under a cloud of distrust and contested claims, finally reached their conclusion. The equitable asset division favored me substantially, reflecting not only the financial misdeeds, but also the tangible and intangible burdens I'd borne. The courtroom exchanges had been tense, with Maggie's credibility eroded by her evasive testimony and the weight of the evidence against her. For the first time in months, a sense of closure began to settle, not with bitterness but with quiet justice. The fallout resonated beyond the courtroom walls. Industry media outlets seized on the story, publishing detailed analyses of Cortex corporate failures and legal missteps. Articles dissected the risks companies face when betraying loyal employees and the importance of transparent governance. The scandal became a cautionary narrative, referenced in professional forums and HR seminars alike. My case served as a stark example of how meticulously documented employees, armed with expertise and legal protections, could hold even powerful corporations accountable. Moreover, several former Cortex employees, emboldened by the verdict, came forward with their own grievances. Whistleblowers recounted stories of questionable terminations and workplace mismanagement, triggering further inquiries and investigations. The company found itself under a microscope, compelled to implement comprehensive reforms to regain trust in the market and among its workforce. Throughout this upheaval, I maintained a posture of professionalism and measured calm. The legal victories, while substantial, were but milestones on a longer journey of personal and professional restoration. I continued to document every development, ensuring that the integrity of the process remained intact and that any attempts at retaliation or obfuscation were recorded. Financially, the judgments secured a foundation of stability and renewal. The recovered assets and awarded damages covered not only immediate losses but also the considerable legal expenses incurred. This financial restitution was vital. It granted me the freedom to rebuild without the shadow of uncertainty cast by Maggie's concealment and Cortex's wrongful termination. More profoundly, the experience reshaped me. The betrayals that once felt like devastating ruptures became catalysts for growth. The painstaking defense of my rights transformed into a testament to resilience and strategic patience. I emerged not only vindicated, but strengthened, my professional reputation intact, my financial footing secure, and my resolve tempered by the trials endured. Yet, even as these judgments reverberated through the industry and the dust slowly settled, the narrative remained open. Cortex restructuring and the broader conversations sparked by the scandal presaged ongoing changes in corporate governance and employee rights. I remained vigilant, aware that the lessons learned here extended far beyond my personal story. This chapter closed not with an end, but with a new beginning, a professional landscape reshaped by the assertion of principles and the enduring power of facts, contracts, and steadfast resilience. Today I stand on a very different professional stage. The years of turmoil, the legal battles, the strategic maneuvers, they all culminated in a fresh start that I hadn't dared to envision during those dark early days. Now, I consult for one of the top technology firms in the region, a position that not only recognizes my expertise, but rewards it generously. My new role comes with a salary that's 30% higher than what I earned at Cortex, and importantly, I hold equity stakes that align my interests with the company's long-term success. This isn't just a job, it's a partnership that values the deep, nuanced knowledge I bring and respects the contractual rights I fought hard to uphold. When I reflect on the journey from that fateful morning to this point, I realize how critical the lessons of documentation and strategic patience were. Every email I saved, every contract clause I meticulously reviewed, every system diagram I secured, became the foundation upon which I rebuilt my professional life. I learned that resilience isn't just about enduring hardship, it's about preparing for it with foresight and responding with calculated calm. Emotional detachment didn't mean indifference. It meant channeling energy into actions guided by facts and legal precision rather than impulse or bitterness. In this new chapter, my role goes beyond technical responsibilities. I'm valued as a strategic advisor who understands how technology integrates with corporate governance, compliance, and risk management. My insights help shape policies and safeguard infrastructure from vulnerabilities, responsibilities that come with a heightened sense of purpose and accountability. The company trusts me not only to maintain systems, but to act as a guardian of their operational integrity, knowing that my experience includes overcoming the most challenging betrayals. The 5 words spoken by that elderly man in the diner, "You're the image of my son," still echo in my mind. They were a reminder of loss, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. That brief encounter, amid my darkest hour, reinforced a truth that has carried me through. No matter how deeply you fall, your core expertise and character can project strength and renewal. It's a lesson I now share with younger colleagues, emphasizing the importance of diligence, integrity, and strategic thinking in navigating complex professional landscapes. Looking back, it's clear that justice in my case was neither swift nor driven by vengeance. It was meticulous, layered with facts, grounded in contracts, and executed with measured resolve. This approach not only restored what was rightfully mine, but elevated my standing in the industry. I'm now part of a professional community that respects those who uphold their commitments and who defend their rights methodically. The scars from betrayal remain, but they've become part of the story that shapes who I am today. I've learned that setbacks, no matter how severe, can be transformed into opportunities when met with clarity and perseverance. My experiences have deepened my appreciation for the power of systems, both technological and legal, to protect and empower individuals. As I continue forward, I remain vigilant. The landscape of corporate technology and employment law is ever evolving, and the lessons from my journey have armed me with the wisdom to navigate whatever challenges lie ahead. The battle I fought was not just about reclaiming what was lost. It was about demonstrating that true professional competence, combined with strategic patience, can turn even the harshest betrayals into a foundation for renewed success. This new chapter is a testament, not only to my survival, but to the enduring power of precision, resilience, and unwavering professionalism. And so, as I look ahead, I do so with confidence, ready to face the future with the same calm determination that has brought me here, knowing that the systems I build, whether of technology or trust, are what truly endure.